spring of 1970, there were black student caucuses, black faculty caucuses, black caucuses within unions in every aspect of this university. There was scarcely a place where you could turn where black people were not meeting and talking about the problems and talking about just being black in the middle of an enormous white institution. There was hardly a place where you could go within the collective environment of this university where people weren't saying, well, we got to do something, where people were not dissatisfied. And so when the various student caucuses began to approach the university administration one at a time, we were all asking essentially the same question. We were saying, well, how come there are not more black medical students? How come there aren't more black engineering students? How come there is no black vice president for the university? How come we only have one recruiter to cover the whole state? People were asking the same questions. Unfortunately, initially, we were not talking to each other about it. The school, in fact, when we first began to talk about in Black Student Union meetings, which was the undergraduate organization, and we started talking about the recruitment problem and this and that and the other, somebody would say, well, I heard that the students in the School of Education have been meeting about this. And somebody else would say, well, I heard that Professor Foster and the folks over in social work have been meeting. But it was all a question of I heard. And at no point in time had we sat down and talked to each other. Now, my recollection of the exact chronology of day to day, did it happen on March 31st or what have you, is not the clearest. But my general recollection of what happened was that the undergraduate student organization, which was the largest, because the number of black students in the undergraduate division is, of course, the largest in the university, we had reached a point of tremendous exasperation. And if there were a most volatile element in the university, it was us. Principally because possibly we were younger, principally because I think that we had experienced a significant amount of student activism in the high schools in the city of Detroit before we came here. And because people were just restless, they were anxious to do something. When we had reached a point of exasperation, certain members amongst the BSU had gone out and had talked to folks in the School of Social Work principally, the School of Education, and the faculty. And we started to confer notes, and we found out that we were getting essentially the same story from the university with little different paragraphs. They'd white out undergraduate students, and they'd put in graduate students qualified to be admitted to our graduate school. But it was essentially the same sort of thing. And so we started to talk to each other. We began to form a coalition. Now, the actual calling of the strike, as I recall, was a rather spontaneous event. We kept talking about the fact that we'd been discussing the problems with the university, and the university wasn't going to do anything. And so folks kept saying, well, what are we going to do? And a gentleman who's sitting in the audience, Mr. Wesley, brother right there, stood up and said, we're going to have a strike. And everybody said, yeah, that's right. That's exactly what we're going to do. And it's not, it seems, you know, when you think about it, it seems like, well, wow, that was spontaneous, and how could that have worked? That could have worked because everybody had about had it up to there at the same time. You, at the very first time for this university, had some dialogue between multiple units of black folks throughout the university. And because the overall environment, frankly, of 1970 was such that not only could you have a strike, but it was almost obligatory. It wasn't a question of were we going to have one, but a question of when and how. That during the BAM strike, there was support from a significant number of white students within the university. And there were those persons who had the responsibility of making sure that that was support, meaning that that support was following the leadership of the black student leaders, and instead of taking over the direction of the strike. And that was a very, very difficult thing to do. Led to some conflict subsequent to the strike. Once the BAM strike was over, I think the real problems began. The problems began because we had made, again, we had basic assumptions in terms of rights, the rights not being met and the way to get them met, but our assumptions did not go far enough. We forgot to take into account the basic nature of institutions. We were reacting to an institution, we were responding to an institution collectively, but we were not an institution. We were a loose, although we worked well together, but we were a loose coalition of individuals who had different ideologies and different frameworks. We had a common goal, but we were not connected by anything. There was no organizational connection that was going to be long-lasting. There was nothing that helped us prospectively institutionalize anything that we were doing. And so it was left to individuals without collective support, without collective interaction, to carry out the implementation of the BAM agreements. And that meant a lot of things. That meant that individuals were given the responsibility of putting together the Center for Afro-American and African Studies. And that was a hard task, because those individuals not only had to put together that center in terms of pulling together faculty, pulling together curriculum, and things of that nature, they had to also combat those forces within the university that did not want that center to exist. And they had to deal effectively with the non-productive attitudes that we of the black community had toward one another without organizational support. Persons were charged with putting together a recruitment program, going out and recruiting black students. They had to do that without institutional support. The university provided a budget, but it was not the university's job. The university had accommodated demands. They were not the university's demands. Those were not the university's goals. Those were our goals. So those individuals were left to try to implement those goals without continuing support, institutional support, organizational support from the black community. Well, it seems that the BAM strike was a good example, but not a unique example, of the black student activism that was the norm within the nation in 1970. That it was important for its time because it had to happen. Black people had to respond. The conditions were incorrect. There was the collective energy and willingness to do a little bit of risk-taking, to go forward and to make some demands and to actually believe that those demands could be met, and that was good. But in 1980, there does not seem to be that feeling, not only within the university, but without. There is an understanding that this university as an institution is not committed to educating and recruiting significant numbers of black students. At least not by its practice. It is not so committed, and it is not reasonable for us to expect that commitment. Because this is not an institution which was founded for and run for the interest of black people. It is not an institution, by my belief, that at any point in time is going to be run in the interest of black people. It is run in the interest of the people of the state of Michigan, whomsoever they may be at the time, and whomsoever may be in power at the time. But that doesn't mean necessarily that therefore black students from the University of Michigan say, hey, well, it's not my thing, you know, we'll just let it go, I'll get my degree and I'll get out, I can't do anything about it anyway. That's not the truth. The truth is that collective action, depending upon you figure out what's best at the time, but that collective action can make a temporary impact upon an institution. That it is possible, by virtue of your making contacts, not only with the folks that within the university, within the black student community within the university, but you've got more hookups available to you now. Not only do you have more black people sitting in the state legislature, but you've got more sitting on the state board and involved in the state board of education. You've got the potential of making contacts on the secondary level with individuals who actually run school systems, as opposed to just trying to, we used to have to try to recruit by calling the vice principals, because there were very few black principals even in the city of Detroit, Flint, Muskegon, or Grand Rapids. So you have those advantages in terms of those kinds of hookups, trying to pull that kind of energy together to make some impact and to force a university to do that which it will not do unless it's forced. But most importantly, and I'm going to end very quickly, most importantly, I think, in terms of the role of black student activism in 1980, it's the role of black people in 1980. And that role is to build our own institutions, to take responsibility for ourselves. We come to the University of Michigan because it is a good school academically, and it has some academic things to offer for us. So while we're here, we have a responsibility to take those things and to do well at them. But we have to keep in mind for what?